I want to welcome you, dear listener, to today's story. It is not an easy one for me to share. I've kept it inside for many years, and only now, as an old woman, do I find the strength to put words to the memories that shaped me and broke me all at once. If you like listening to stories like mine, I would be grateful if you subscribed. But more important than that, please write in the comments where you are watching from. I want to feel the world listening with me, to know that I am not alone as I speak these words. Because what I'm about to tell you, it still echoes inside me every night. My son slapped me across the face and screamed, "You're not my mother anymore." That moment split my life in two. The time before, when I believed love could conquer everything, and the time after, when I learned that sometimes love is not enough. Please, listen carefully until the end. I want you to understand the weight a mother carries, even when her child turns against her. My story begins many years ago, in a small town that never made it onto any map of importance. Our home was modest, a tiny two-bedroom house with peeling wallpaper in the kitchen and floors that creaked with every step. But it was ours. I had lost my husband early. He passed away when my son was only 7 years old. From that moment, it was just the two of us. I promised him and myself that I would carry both roles, mother and father. And for a long time, I believed I was doing it well. My boy was kind, always smiling. He had a head of dark hair that curled at the edges and eyes that lit up whenever I entered the room. Every morning before school, he would sit at the table, swinging his legs as I made breakfast. He loved my pancakes, even when they came out a little too thin. He would wrap his small arms around me, whispering, "I love you, Mama." Those were the days I still believed the bond between us could never break. But life, as I would come to learn, has a way of changing children when they grow. The first signs were small, so small that at first I dismissed them. He became quiet. His cheerful stories about school disappeared. When I asked him what was wrong, he shrugged or walked away. I told myself it was just adolescence, that all boys passed through storms of silence and slammed doors. Then came the friends, older boys from down the street, ones I had always felt uneasy about. They lingered at the corner, cigarettes hidden badly behind their palms, their laughter sharp like broken glass. My son started spending his afternoons with them. He would come home with the smell of smoke on his clothes, with eyes that avoided mine. When I asked where he had been, he answered with one word: out. I worked long hours at the factory, my hands blistered from handling machines, but I still tried to be present for him. I cooked dinner, I waited at the table. Sometimes he didn't come home until midnight. I sat by the window, watching shadows pass on the street, praying to hear his steps. When he finally arrived, his face was closed off, his words cold. I tried to reach for him. He pulled away. One evening, after I asked him why he had skipped school again, he turned to me and said words that pierced my heart. "You don't know anything. You're not my father. Stop trying to control me." It wasn't just what he said. It was the way his voice dripped with contempt. That was the first time I realized I was beginning to lose him. I searched for answers anywhere I could. I spoke to his teachers, hoping they would tell me he was just going through a phase. They shook their heads and told me he was skipping classes, hanging out with the wrong crowd. I tried to confide in neighbors, but their eyes carried judgment, not compassion. I became the mother who had lost control of her son. And in our small town, reputations clung to you like smoke. You could not wash them away. Still, I refused to give up. I stayed up late into the night, ironing his clothes, writing little notes to tuck into his lunchbox even when he left it untouched. I told him I loved him every chance I got, even when his only response was silence. My love grew desperate, almost frantic, as if saying the words enough times could keep him from slipping further away. But he was already drifting, pulled by forces stronger than a mother's arms. Sometimes he would vanish for entire weekends. When he returned, his eyes were bloodshot, and his voice carried a new hardness. He stopped calling me Mama. Instead, he said my name, like a stranger. The boy I had raised with all the love I had left in me was changing into someone I didn't recognize. And yet, nothing prepared me for the night that would come, the night when my own son's hand would strike my face, and his voice would scream those words I can never forget. The night after that first confrontation lingered in my mind, like smoke that refuses to clear. I lay awake in my narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening for his steps in the hallway. He was asleep in his room, but the distance between us felt greater than if he had been miles away. I whispered to myself, "It's just a phase. He'll come back to me." I repeated those words until dawn, but they didn't feel true anymore. In the morning, I tried to speak with him as if nothing had happened. I placed a plate of eggs on the table, poured him a glass of milk. He sat with his head bent low, tapping his fingers against the wood, eyes hidden beneath his messy hair. "Eat something," I said softly. He didn't answer. He pushed the plate aside, the scrape of ceramic on wood slicing through me like a knife. Then he rose and walked out the door without a word. I wanted to follow him, but I didn't. Instead, I stood frozen, staring at the uneaten food. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, a silence that told me I was no longer welcome in his world. Over the next weeks, the pattern grew worse. He stopped returning home for dinner. When he did come, it was always late, his voice sharp and impatient. He spoke to me as if I were a stranger intruding in his life. One evening, when I asked him if he had done his homework, he turned to me with eyes that no longer looked like my son's and hissed, "Why do you even care? You don't understand me. You never will." It broke something inside me. I wasn't angry. I was afraid. Afraid of the darkness I saw swallowing him. Afraid of the wall rising higher each day between us. I sought help wherever I could. I visited his school, speaking with teachers who shook their heads in disappointment. "He's distracted," they said. "He doesn't try." Some whispered that he had been seen near the liquor store with older boys. I tried to talk to the parents of his friends, but they shut their doors quickly, unwilling to acknowledge what their own children were doing. I even turned to family, my sister across town. She told me, "You've spoiled him. That's the problem. You need to be stricter." But how could I be strict with the only person left in my life? How could I risk pushing him further away? I was clinging to the memory of the little boy who once held my hand tightly on the way to school. The boy who used to fall asleep on my lap as I hummed lullabies. That boy felt gone, but my heart refused to let him go. Then the shouting began. Small arguments over simple things, curfews, meals, chores, turned into screaming matches. His voice would rise higher and sharper, and I found myself trembling, my own voice breaking as I begged him to calm down. He laughed once, cruelly, when I tried to block the doorway to keep him from leaving. "Move," he growled, and the way he said it chilled me. I moved aside. At night, I sat in my room clutching the photograph of him as a child, tears soaking the worn edges of the picture. I asked myself what I had done wrong, what mistake had led us here. Had I failed him as a mother? Was I too weak without his father by my side? One Saturday evening, I discovered money missing from the jar I kept hidden in the kitchen cupboard. It wasn't much, just enough for groceries for the week, but it was all I had. I confronted him gently. "Did you take the money?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked. "So what if I did? You've got plenty. I needed it more." I told him it was wrong, that stealing from his own mother was something I couldn't understand. That was when he slammed his fist against the wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. "Stop talking to me like you're better than me," he screamed. I stood there, frozen, my hands trembling. That was the moment I realized my son's anger wasn't just rebellion. It was something darker, something that threatened to consume us both. The neighbors began to notice. I saw the way they looked at me when I walked to the store. Whispers followed me, sharp and cruel. She can't control her own son. That boy is going to end up in jail. Their words cut deep, but the deepest cut of all came from the one person I loved most. One night, I waited again by the window, watching the street. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. At nearly 3 in the morning, I heard the door creak open. He stumbled in, his steps heavy and uneven. His clothes smelled of smoke and something stronger, and when I asked where he had been, he turned on me with eyes full of rage. "You don't get to ask me anything. You're nothing to me." I felt my knees weaken, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to tell him how wrong he was, but my voice failed me. Instead, I simply whispered, "I love you." He laughed bitterly and disappeared into his room, slamming the door so hard the glass in the window rattled. That night, I sat alone until dawn, my heart aching with a pain no words could describe. I had thought losing my husband was the greatest tragedy of my life, but I was wrong. Losing my son, even while he was still alive and under my roof, was worse. And yet, the cruelest blow was still to come. The day when his hand would strike my face, and his voice would shatter what little remained of the bond between us. That day was drawing near. I remember the morning when I realized I was no longer just afraid of losing him. I was afraid of him. It was early spring, the air outside still heavy with the chill of winter. I had left for work at the factory before sunrise and returned in the evening, exhausted, my hands sore from hours at the machines. When I opened the door, I found him sitting at the table with 2 boys I had never seen before. Their eyes were sharp, their laughter too loud for the small kitchen. Empty bottles sat on the table, the smell of smoke thick in the air. "Who are they?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I wanted. My son leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and smirked. "Friends. They're staying for a while." I felt my heart sink. Our home was small, fragile, the last place I thought I still had some control. But at that moment, I realized even here, I was being pushed out. I told the boys to leave. They laughed, one of them muttering something cruel under his breath. My son didn't defend me. Instead, he told me to stop embarrassing him. I stood frozen as the strangers finally left, their laughter echoing down the street. That night, I tried to talk to him again. I told him how worried I was, how much I loved him. He didn't look at me. He only muttered, "You don't understand. You never did." Then he slammed his door, and the sound of it closing felt like the shutting of a coffin. I kept trying. I went to the pastor at our church, hoping he could talk some sense into my boy. The pastor visited once, spoke gently to him about respect, about the importance of family. My son nodded through it all, but the moment the pastor left, he burst out laughing. "You really think some old man in a suit can change me?" he sneered. Each attempt I made to reach him only seemed to push him further away. My love turned into pleading, my voice cracked with desperation, and every time his eyes grew colder. One evening, after another argument, I collapsed into a chair, burying my face in my hands. My chest ached with the weight of helplessness. I whispered to myself, "I'm losing him. I'm truly losing him." The people around us noticed. At the market, women who once greeted me warmly now turned away. Parents told their children not to spend time with my son. My shame grew heavier by the day, but even worse was the loneliness. I had no one to lean on. Everyone had already decided my boy was lost, and that I had failed. The turning point came one Sunday afternoon. I had cooked his favorite meal, hoping to remind him of better times. Roast chicken with potatoes, the same dish I had made every year for his birthday. I set the table, smoothing the worn tablecloth, arranging everything carefully, as though order could bring back love. When he came in, I smiled. "Sit, please. Eat with me." He glanced at the food, then at me. "I'm not hungry." His voice was flat, dismissive. I begged him, "Just a little. For me." That was when he exploded. He shoved the chair back so hard it scraped against the floor, his voice rising in fury. "Why can't you just leave me alone? Stop pretending like you care. You don't know me. You never did." I stood, tears in my eyes, trying to calm him. I reached for his arm gently. That was when it happened. His hand flew across my face, sharp and sudden. The sting of his palm burned against my cheek. My vision blurred with tears, but worse than the pain was the look in his eyes, cold, merciless, almost proud. Then came the words that have haunted me ever since. "You're not my mother anymore." The room fell silent. My hands shook. I wanted to scream, to collapse, to ask how he could say something so cruel. But no words came. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him, leaving me alone with the echo of those words. I pressed my hand to my cheek, feeling the heat where he had struck me. My legs gave out, and I sank to the floor, sobbing into the silence. That was the moment my world shattered. Not when my husband died, not when the neighbors turned their backs, but right there, in my own kitchen, when the child I had given everything to declared I was no longer his mother. I stayed on the floor for what felt like hours, unable to move. My tears dried into salt on my face, but inside me, something deeper broke. I felt as though I had failed in the most important task of my life. Later, when he returned home, he didn't speak to me. He didn't apologize. He moved past me like I was invisible, retreating to his room without a glance. And I, too broken to confront him, simply let him go. That night, I sat at the window again, staring into the darkness, wondering how it had come to this. I whispered prayers into the empty air, prayers that felt unanswered. My son was still alive, still under my roof, yet I had never felt more abandoned. And though I thought that moment was the lowest point a mother could endure, I was wrong. Because the days that followed brought something even darker, something that would test me more than I ever thought possible. The day after he struck me, the bruise on my cheek throbbed every time I looked in the mirror. I tried to cover it with powder, but the faint mark remained, a reminder etched into my skin of the boy I once cradled in my arms. I told myself it had been a moment of madness, that surely he would come to me with tears and apologies. But the hours passed, and no such words came. He walked through the house with heavy steps, eyes averted, shoulders squared like armor. When he passed me in the hallway, he did not look at me. When I set a plate of food in front of him, he pushed it aside. It was as if I had ceased to exist. The silence was worse than the slap. That evening, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the untouched dinner on the table. I whispered into the empty room, "I am still your mother. Nothing you say will change that." But the walls gave no answer. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lamp on, waiting for him to come home. Midnight passed, then 1 o'clock, then 2. Finally, at nearly dawn, I heard the door creak open. He stumbled in, the smell of alcohol clinging to him, his clothes rumpled and dirty. I wanted to run to him, to embrace him, to beg him to let me help. But I stayed frozen, my heart pounding. "Where have you been?" I whispered. He glared at me, his eyes full of disdain. "Don't start with me again." "Please," I begged, my voice trembling. "You're my son. I just want to understand." That was when he laughed, a cruel, hollow laugh that didn't belong to the child I had raised. "You're not my mother anymore," he repeated, slow and deliberate this time. The words landed heavier than the slap. I felt the room tilt around me. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the chair beside me. But still, I tried. I whispered through the tears choking my throat. I love you. No matter what you say, I will always love you. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and vanished into his room, shutting the door with finality. The silence that followed was unbearable. It was as if the house itself had died. The next day, I tried to carry on with my routine. I went to work, though my body ached with exhaustion. I folded laundry, swept the floor, cooked meals he refused to eat. Every task felt empty. I was moving, but inside I was hollow. The boy I loved was slipping further from me with each breath, and I no longer knew how to reach him. The neighbors whispered louder now. At the grocery store, I heard one woman murmur, "That poor mother, she's lost him." Another replied, "No, she let him get away." I lowered my head, pretending not to hear, though each word pierced deeper than any blade. One evening, I broke down in the church. Alone in the pew, I clasped my hands and begged God for guidance. I asked what I had done to deserve such cruelty, why my only son turned against me. My tears fell hot onto the wooden bench, but the silence in that church was just as empty as the silence in my home. When I returned, the house was dark. He hadn't come back yet. I sat at the window, staring at the street. Hours passed. At last, I saw him walking with two boys, the same rough faces that had sat at my table before. They laughed, pushing each other, their shadows long against the pavement. My son didn't look toward the house. He walked as if he didn't belong here anymore. I pressed my forehead against the glass, whispering to myself, "Please come back to me. Please." But I knew he was already drifting far beyond my reach. And still, I did not give up. Because a mother never truly gives up, even when her child wounds her deeper than anyone else could. But what I did not know was that the worst was still ahead. Because soon, his anger would not just be against me. Soon, he would make choices that would bring strangers into our home, choices that would force me to face not only his rejection, but the judgment of the world around us. That night, as I sat alone in the quiet, I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something told me that I had not yet seen the darkest side of my son, and I was right. If you think what I have told you so far is unbearable, you cannot imagine what came next. Do not miss the next part of my story, because that was when the real nightmare began.